We're joined now by Coach Brandon Shelby, the cornerbacks coach at Indiana. And Coach, you've been there for a long time. You know the program really well. And I want to begin today by asking you about George Taliaferro. When you first heard that name, what were your thoughts about George Taliaferro and the legend that he has left there at Indiana?
Well, I've been fortunate to be here for some time, and actually, when I first got here, George would kind of come around and speak to the team often. So I had a chance to kind of meet with him, get to know him, and he really was just an awesome guy. And then when you you look back and you look at the story, you listen to the story, and you see the things he had to do, and the challenges he went through over the years. It just excites you to know that he took that sacrifice for us to be here, and he was a man's man too. He was a guy that could laugh and joke, hang out with. He was quite funny, had some great one-liners. He knew he was a man. He would let you know he was a man, but he did it in a humble way, and he always did it in an encouraging way for you to be the next George in whatever endeavor that you chose to do.
Yeah, can you think of any good one-liners off the top of your head that he gave?
Well, the main thing he just wanted you to know, like, hey, listen, I know I'm old. I look old to you now, but I used to be the man and I still got a little bit left in the tank. So that was just the main thing he wanted you to know, like, I ran this thing now, you know what I mean? But he did it in a way that it didn't come off as self-serving, you know what I mean? It was one of the type of deals where he used his athletic talent to break down some barriers, and he just didn't want you ever to forget it. And I think that was awesome about him.
Yeah, now, obviously the biggest thing about Taliaferro is that he was on that 1945 team that has been regarded as arguably the best in Indiana history, going 9-0-1. You guys, of course, really were pretty close to knocking down
Right.
that moniker this past year. How much does the program kind of look to that 1945 team and George Taliaferro? How much do you guys kind of look to that as something to aspire to?
Well, I tell you what, Coach Allen has done a great job of really just introducing him and really in the man that he was, the character that he is. And before the season, we actually played a video of him about grit. And it really kind of it hit home to some of the players that at the end of the day, when you're playing a schedule like this, that one would probably say, looking at it, maybe it wasn't as favorable as one would say, but the grit towards at the end of the day, this is the schedule that we have in the Big Ten East, and it is what's going to be. And so, and impossible. There's no such thing as impossible, and that's the one thing that he talked about in his video when he spoke about grit. Impossible is nothing to the man who believes he can. And so, I think that video hit home to the guys, and we just do a great job of making sure that they understand that the history before us, the things that have come before us, to allow us to sit here today. And he had to go through some grit. He had to go through a tough schedule. And if he did it, we can surely go and do it.
When it comes to that grit and those types of character qualities that George Taliaferro had, how much is that kind of stress to the players in the program these days?
Well, and one thing about grit, I think you can tie it into really what Tom is really trying to do here and building that culture around LEO. And at the end of the day, love to me can be substituted by the word sacrifice, right? Sacrifice to me is the ultimate definition of love, and sacrifice for the guy to my left and to my right. And that's what he did. He sacrificed some things along the way to ensure that people of color and minorities have an opportunity to walk the halls and walk the campus of Indiana and sit in that meeting room. And me as a coach, sit in my office, So that grit, that although his days were probably a lot more challenging than mine, we all have challenges. And there's two things you can do from challenge. You can either run away from it, or you can hit it head on and keep fighting to get what you want in the right way. And so those things hold true to his life. And when he first got here, it was probably a tough battle, but he persevered, and his long-term goal was to get people to judge him based on his character and not the color of his skin. And I think he did an excellent job.
When we talk about love each other,
Right.
what is it about the LEO brand that when we look at pioneers and we look at people who've had to go through some of the sacrifices that you just meant, how does that correlate? How does love each other actually have something to do with what we're seeing some of these pioneers go through, in your opinion?
Well, I think ultimately when we think of the word love, we think of something soft, And I think that's the total opposite. To love something is actually pretty hard and pretty tough, because ultimately when you love something or somebody, you look past their faults and you love them, and it's unconditional. And so love doesn't mean I don't hold you accountable. And I think at the end of the day, when we talk about that in football, is I love you enough to hold you accountable. I love you enough to understand that you and I both have faults. We have to look past it. But at the end of the day, there's a common goal that we can get to, because we both had to sacrifice. And love and sacrifice is a two-way street. And what made George so great is I think he sacrificed and he loved, but sometimes even in the community and some guys on his own team, right, didn't reciprocate that. So, and I think that was the ultimate, he defined LEO, because he loved the university, he loved teammates, and then sometimes they didn't love him back. And so I think that's what football, great teams do. Great teams do that. I'm gonna run down on kickoff and I'm gonna sacrifice my body because I've told you I was gonna do it. You count on me doing it, and I love you enough to go and do it. And ultimately, I don't know what type of collision is on the other end. And that's football.
But that being said, he was the first Black player to be drafted in the National Football League, taken by the Chicago Bears, I believe the 13th round, if my memory serves. Just knowing that he has that part of his legacy, as well as someone who had draft aspirations yourself. You played the game yourself in college. What does that add to his level of significance for a Black player, Black coaches within this game?
It's just not African-American history. It's Indiana history. It's NFL history. It's American history. And at the end of the day, it's great that you guys are taking the time to show it, because when you don't respect history, you don't pay homage to it, what you do is you leave the door open for history to repeat itself. And so you guys taking time to do this during this month is awesome. We have a long ways to go. I mean, we talk about that in the media now, but we've come a long ways too. And so at the end of the day, him going through that process, going through that sacrifice, allowed us to at least have communication, to have open dialogue, and to know that ultimately this is where we need to get to. I think that at the end of the day, we need representation. I mean, when you look at college athletics, especially football, over 70% are African Americans, and at times, in the coaching aspect, those numbers don't correlate with the minorities that are playing.
George Taliaferro played up to 7 positions
Right.
at one time in the NFL. You were a DB. He played DB. He was a quarterback. He was a receiver, a kick returner, a running back. What does it take to possibly play even just more than one, maybe just 2 positions? What does it take for somebody to be able to do that all at one time?
It's called DNA. That's what it's called. His DNA was a lot better than most other DNA, and you don't see that very often. And that just goes to the credit to him, how explosive he was to do all those things. And then also too, had the mental capacity to hold all the different plays and the different techniques and to go out there and do it at a high level. You know what I mean? It's just not to do it, but do it at a high level. And him doing that just opened up the doors to people like Anthony Thompson. Without a George Taliaferro, there is no Anthony Thompson. There's no Antoine Randall. And so, and Antoine was all over the field. I mean, so at the end of the day, he just opened the eyes to say, let him go. He can do it. And his DNA was better than most, he did a great job of honing in and being a heck of a player.
Last thing for you, what is it that you want your players and even prospective players to know about George Taliaferro, and even what they can do to possibly live up to what he was?
Well, I think I want my players to always understand that someone came before you to help your path a little bit easier, and never forget that. Sometimes we look at these facilities, we look at all the different gear that we have, all these blessings that we've obtained. Somebody had to pay the price for it, and I never want those guys to take it for granted. I never want them to forget history. Like I said, one thing about history, if you don't respect it, you don't study it, you don't go back and look at it, then you leave the door for it to open and happen again. And so I think it is awesome that we put a statue out in front of our stadium, so that every day, every student athlete that walks through this door will at least have to ask a question: who is that guy? What did he do? And understand and respect all the different things he had to go through to get to where we are today. He wasn't allowed to live in the dormitories. He wasn't allowed to eat at different restaurants. He wasn't allowed to go to different movies. And what he did was, I mean, think about this. I mean, he went to the president of the university and said, you know, I have to go and walk down the streets, and I can't eat in some of the same restaurants. And Herman B. Wells, the president, stood up and called that particular restaurant and said, if we can't allow this to be inclusive for everybody, we're shutting it down. So at the end of the day, us going to a place called Buffalo Louie's would not have happened if George Taliaferro said, I want to go eat at that restaurant with my counterparts. And then also, too, somebody having the courage, like a Herman B. Wells, to stand up against what society had deemed to be right and said, we're going to make this place inclusive to everybody, or it's not going to be for anybody. And that's what it means when you walk past that statue, that it's just not for athletes. It's for a lot of minorities who are at this campus right now, who go to Buffalo Louie's, who go to the sample gates over there, who are eating and enjoying an opportunity to be a student athlete. And so, or just an athlete or a student in general. So those are things that I think that I want our players to understand and respect. And I think ultimately us showing them video, and it wasn't that long ago. I mean, he died just a few years ago. So this didn't happen some decades ago where, you know, they can't relate or this guy wasn't around. And, you know, the next thing we could do is try to get that jersey retired, because ultimately I think that at the day that pays the ultimate homage to a guy to understand that the barriers he knocked down, we're not going to let somebody else replicate that jersey, because ultimately he helped us get a mighty long way. And so I never want to forget that as a coach. I never want my players forget that. And then the most important thing is make sure that our youth and our young people don't forget it as well.
Yeah, those are all very, very important lessons. The history part, for sure, that's something that I'm going to take away from this. This has been a great interview, Coach Shelby. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Take care of yourself.